Hi, this is your mini lecture for Chapter 6, Strategic Planning, Corporate Culture, and Corporate Compliance. All right, so we first start out in this chapter by talking about ethics and strategic planning and how they go together. So, strategic planning in an organization is the process with which future courses of actions are developed to achieve the firm's short and long term goals. So, strategic planning usually is identifying what larger projects or initiatives or long-term goals a company or an organization is hoping to achieve in the next, usually more than 1 year, or it is more than 1 year, and usually 3 to 5 years. So we set some strategic goals and then we create a plan of how we're going to achieve that. So when setting your strategic plan, it's important to make sure that your plan is also sound in its ethics. So 5 questions to ask before making a final decision in this situation is, why is this bothering me? Is it my responsibility? What is the ethical concern? What do others think? And am I being true to myself? The mirror test. So the mirror test is really the ability of the person making the decisions to look in the mirror after a decision's been made and confirm that they've made the right choice. And really what it does is it helps to ensure consistency between the organizational and personal values. So there's a cycle of ethics. So the ethical cycle starts with a problem statement, problem analysis, options, ethical judgment, reflection, and then morally accepted action. It's not always linear because sometimes feedback occurs, which you'll see here. So sometimes during the problem analysis, we have some feedback and reflection and so forth. So you can see what the process looks like. And you must identify which stakeholders are going to be affected by your problem and how does it affect their interests. What are the moral values that need to be considered in analyzing the problem? And what are the relevant facts related to the moral problem? And that can help you to make a morally acceptable action or decision. All right, so the ethical cycle helps employees understand who they are from an ethical perspective. And a defining moment is when a decision maker has a choice between two plausible and acceptable strategic actions, and they choose the one that they feel best when they say, who am I, who are we, and who is the company, and when they choose the one that's best for all of those. We can also use a decision tree to help to make decisions. You can pause it here and read about it, but I'm going to go on to the next page, to the next slide, and show you what that looks like. So you can use a decision tree. Is the proposed action legal? Yes or no? Does it maximize shareholder or stakeholder value? Is it ethical? Would it be ethical not to take action? All right, and you can see how you can come up with yes, you should do this, or no, you shouldn't. Make that decision. Sometimes ethical crises occur and then we have to deal with the fallout of the ethical situation after the fact. Um, and so an ethical crisis occurs when an event that was not part of our normal course of action takes place, and then it usually has a negative impact on a firm. And so we need to look at whether this is an internal or an external issue and the frequency of the issue and whether it's classified as normal or abnormal. And so here you can tell we have the typology of a crisis. So internal normal, internal abnormal, external normal, external abnormal. And you can see some of the situations where this might happen. And we can try to plan. And we're always trying to prevent these things from happen, but I think you'll see that some of these happen a lot more than we think they do. Corporate culture is also really important thing, and this is really the shared values and beliefs of an employees within a given organization. Um, and so we want our corporate culture and we want these shared values and beliefs to be rooted in a strong ethical foundation so that we can ensure that unethical activities don't take place. And we want to base this on norms and behavior patterns, all right? So we want to develop these norms so that it is the norm to make ethical decisions and people working in our organization are ethical individuals. There's three levels of corporate culture that we can look at. One is the artifacts. These are actually the things we see and we hear. So it's the language, it's our dress code, it's actual like symbols that are present within the organization, things we can see and touch. Our shared values are based on what groups within the firm learn about what is acceptable and what is not. And so um, we'll talk about how this develops and how we can change this. And then basic assumptions is the starting point for decision making within the firm. We make some basic assumptions before we make decisions, and we do this in our everyday lives. Um, you might make the assumption, I'll give you an example. Because of some of the trucker strikes, we might make the assumption that certain products are going to be hard to find and thus we'll stock up on them. So we'll make the decision to stock up because we're assuming things might be hard to find. All right, how managers can change a corporate culture. So what do we do if our corporate culture isn't what we want it to be? Maybe it's not ethical. Well, there's primary embedding mechanisms and then there's secondary articulation and enforcement. So primary embedding mechanisms include what our leaders are paying attention to, measuring, and controlling, how leaders react to critical incidents or crisis, what is observed to be the leader's criteria for allocating resources, the observation of the leader's behavior, so actually the leader's behavior themselves, how leaders allocate rewards and status decisions, what is the criteria for recruiting, selection, promotion, retirement, um, and so forth. And then secondary is the design and structure of the organization, systems, procedures, the rights, the rituals, the design of the firm's building, actual physical spaces, storytelling within an organization, and then the formal statements that are developed by the firm to represent their philosophy, creeds, and charters. So how do we change ethical values within an organization or even within ourselves? This is actually really common in change in general. So we want to unfreeze. So if someone's being unethical or unethical things are happening within an organization, the first thing we want to do is get rid of those existing beliefs that this is okay. Then top management needs to ensure that what is acceptable and unacceptable is clear. So we need to change those behaviors or work to. And then once those behaviors are changed, we want to enforce that. We want to refreeze that so that's the new norm and that top managers need to reinforce their commitment to support strong ethical behavior. All right, so culture should include three things in order to be ethical. So we want to define the philosophy and corporate values in our mission statement, and that will be a good starting point for the ethical foundation. Develop guidelines, sometimes we call this a code of ethics within an organization, and make sure people are aware of it. And then establish a formal channel for employees to report violations, like we've talked about. Um, let people be whistleblowers if they need to be whistleblowers. And we can evaluate our culture. All right. So do our employees understand what the tone is that was set by senior management is? Can you confirm that people are making ethical decisions? Can employees throughout your organization describe the company's code of ethics? Do employees at all levels of your organization ask questions and express concern? And do employees believe that the mechanisms are in place to allow them to voice opinions without the fear of them being retaliated against? So if we want to create a climate of integrity, we want to have leaders that have integrity. You need to have realistic goals, provide training on what that looks like, um, distinguish the difference between compliance and ethics. So compliance is really, doing what we tell you to do, and implement this at all levels of an organization. All right, and so the ethics and corporate compliance are interlinked, but are still a little bit different. So to embed positive ethics and values, we can take this 5-step process to try to ensure that our ethics and corporate compliance are in line. There are also some laws related to ethics in the workplace. One is U.S. federal sentencing guidelines. which just states that organizations can be charged with and convicted of federal crimes, and they can be fined and sentenced to probation for up to 5 years in order to pay restitution to their victims. This covers things like fraud, waste, discharge, antitrust, food and drug, and tax violations. Another area of ethics that you see a lot in business is corruption, and this is the deliberate abuse of public roles and resources for the benefit of a private firm or an individual. So there's petty corruption, like illegal incentives or bribes. There's grand corruption, so bribes to gain major infrastructure or military contracts, and then influence peddling, maybe like contributing to a political campaign to get what you want. Um, Transparency International scores countries on their corruption index. And so they have an annual corruption perception index, and the higher the score, the lower the level of corruption. In some countries, corruption is really common. And so these are the top 28, and you can see how they score based on, the level of corruption. The U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act is a law in the United States which prohibits any U.S. firm and its subsidiaries, so it's other foreign entities it owns, from giving foreign government officials any financial incentives in exchange for either obtaining or retaining government business. So it's really about bribing government officials to get government contracts and government business. Um, and so that is a major piece of legislation that is out there specific to corruption and ethics. So that's a mini lecture of chapter 6. If you have questions, contact me.